began chronicling.
Just 1 second. The humble beginnings of World of Warcraft. Okay. Let's see what we've got going on right here. This is okay. Can somebody please invite me up to an Arachnid Harvester group? I want to go ahead and join this one. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and see what this is here. All right, we'll watch the video. Sorry, guys. Just wanted to make sure I hopefully get 1 kill, but this is just a random idiot. All right. Here we go.
The history of World of Warcraft 2 years ago with our Mists of Pandaria retrospectives and our cut content showcases. Today, though, we are taking it to the next level. The complete history of World of Warcraft's life as a live game. Every patch in every expansion in this a new regular series. So, subscribe, hit that bell button, and let's begin.
That's a lot. Nick Sim new video? Well, we're just going to watch this, and we can watch the Nick Sim one after that, okay? Patch 1.1 launch day.
Release day, patch 1.1. Excitement, wonder, and perhaps a little bit of frustration. After all, that install process took 5 CDs. Once you have the game finally installed, though, you are greeted with that exceptional opening cinematic, your server selection, and character creation. A screen that many were stuck at for hours as they looked at online random name generators and tried to come up with something. And after all that was done, you were off on your way to Azeroth. And despite being released, this was not the first version of Azeroth. The game had went through an extensive beta testing cycle, and as such, its launch patch 1.1 had huge changes, with the first hitting players as they made their characters. Racials. First off, adding to how difficult it was to decide on a character, racial traits and abilities were introduced with this patch. Prior to this, the races in the game were only separated by their base stats, something that had been a staple of RPGs in the past.
I feel like almost all, doesn't Dungeons & Dragons have racial abilities? I'm like 90% sure it does. So I feel like racials and all that stuff was already in fantasy games to begin with.
After all, we'd rather be punched by a gnome than a tauren.
Yeah, probably.
Due to the power of these new racials, back in 1.1, players absolutely could make the wrong choice, although for many, the difference in racial abilities was overshadowed by the fantasy of playing the character that they wanted. At this early stage in World of Warcraft's life, endgame had not even been reached, so min-maxing just was not on people's radar. Yeah,
nobody gave a fuck.
5% int for being a gnome, that was
game.
Great, but hey, some people had standards. In reality, the racial traits did feel quite major, though.
True.
And they would go on to add a lot of flavor to people's choices. Gnomes having escape artists to break through roots and snares made them feel like the slippery little gits that they are.
See, I forgot even escape artist was a cast. I forgot all about that. I thought that was just a button you just push, but you used to actually have to cast escape artist. What the fuck, man?
While undead had access to cannibalize, allowing them to heal out of combat by eating corpses. Grotesque, yes, but those little things really did help define the experience of players. Now, sure, there were some less interesting racials, but even they did manage to guide players towards certain fantasies and playstyles. Giving tauren a bonus to herbalism did not amount to much of a gameplay benefit, but because it primed many tauren players to pick herbalism, it would reinforce the idea of them being a race of gentle, flower-picking people. That same thing goes for some races that had bonuses to weapon skills. It was a small bonus at best, but orc players would likely stick with axes, while human players would likely make use of swords
and maces.
Lots of little touches like
this.
Wait,
didn't humans have mace specialization too? I think they did. Am I right about that? Yeah. Yeah, okay, I thought so. And then dwarves had only mace specialization. Yeah, but it's because humans were just better than dwarves. But, you know, it's the way it goes. And guns? Well, yeah, guns, yeah, of course. The dwarves, that's the America race, okay?
Reinforce the fantasy of the world.
Guns and maces.
Really guided players' behavior, ultimately shaping how we all imagine Azeroth's denizens. 1.1, though, did bring far more, bringing World of Warcraft far, far closer to content completion. Patch 1.1 added a Nyxia's Lair and Molten Core, mostly. Instead of having full loot tables, they actually dropped placeholder gear at this stage, and this does suggest that Blizzard knew it would take quite a while for people to reach the end game of World of Warcraft.
Yeah, it took most people months.
Were mysterious end game areas that required completing...
Like, I I started leveling whenever I was on summer break between like 10th and 11th grade, and I didn't hit 60 until I was in school. Like I was like maybe like a few weeks, maybe a month into school before I even hit 60. It took me months.
Pretty major quest lines to actually enter. Many players weren't even sure what a raid was at this stage, and despite being available from launch, the first raid
people were
boss
shitty
to
back
die,
then,
Molten
dude.
Core's Luciferon, wasn't killed until the 20th of January. That's over 2 months after World of Warcraft launched.
Wow.
And while Onyxia herself did fall on the 30th, making the first raid complete, Ragnaros would defend the Molten Core until the 25th of April. A pretty massive time as compared to today's raid bosses.
Yeah.
Gearing up and completing raids really was a long-term goal in this era, and I think those timelines really do show it. Patch 1.1 also added a ton of quests across the world, with both the Eastern and Western Plaguelands seeing major additions. Then also, prior to 1.1, the Horde really got the short end of the stick, as both Ashenvale and Desolace were, well, desolate for them. 1.1 changed that, greatly bolstering the Horde questing on Kalimdor, giving them a lot more variety than just shades of red and brown. Going from Durotar through Barrens down to Thousand Needles and then into Tanaris, well, that would have left some unfortunate players staring at dirt and dust for weeks. The Barrens, of course, being so central to the Horde is what defined a significant portion of early leveling for those players, and we all know what Barrens chat was like back then. If you didn't experience it, well, I think you know its reputation.
The beta's end, alright?
Patch 1.1, as well as adding things, also removed a lot of failed beta experiments. Blizzard had many ideas for the game, and not all of them were winners. To begin with, they replaced the Tauren's plains running ability. Now, this was basically just a ramping move speed increase.
This is basically increases your running speed. The longer you run, the faster you go up to a maximum speed. You cannot use plains running in combat, underwater, or indoors. So you basically, like, Tauren would pretty much have the exact same ability as what are those guys that are the cats or the dogs, Gilneans, or what are they? Worgen. So they would have the same fucking thing, and it never actually made it to live servers, unfortunately. I don't think that it did. Maybe it did, I don't remember. But I thought this was always a really fucking cool thing
that Taurens had in favor of learning a mount skill. As they ran, they would get faster and faster until they reached the appropriate mount speed after 10 seconds. Unlike regular mounts, this would cancel on hit, not just on days, as well as upon stopping movement, and this made for a very start-stop experience for torrent movement during the beta. Of course, in an attempt to keep it balanced with mounts, Blizzard sort of had to make it that frustrating in the past. If it did not get cancelled on a hit, then Tauren would have been able to move at epic mount speed in combat, making them both very powerful in PvE and PvP, especially for hunters who could attack
they're
on
really
move.
big cows.
Of course, that's not all. Players
They've
also
be
reported activating it when they didn't want to, with unexpected speed boosts leading to all sorts of catastrophes. It's a bit of a shame they couldn't work out the balance of this, because it definitely was a unique thing for the Tauren. While the Kodo mounts that they added as a replacement look fine and do fit the Tauren well, you really can tell they were late additions to the game, as mounted Tauren were not taken into consideration when Blizzard made doors. In fact, the Tauren themselves were so large that they could not jump through the window to get into Molten Core. They instead had to use the entrance located at the back of the Blackrock Depths. That's far from all that they removed, though. Next, we've got a glance at one of the potential missteps that Blizzard swerved away from at the last minute. They reduced the durability loss from combat and added the 10% death penalty to make up for it. Now, before this, there was no death penalty beside having to corpse run, although they did toy with XP loss early on in the beta. On that front, they also changed the spirit healer behavior. Now, we've all been there before. You're exploring an area, you shouldn't get into it, and a mob crushes you. The trek back would be time-consuming and awkward, so you would begrudgingly accept the summoning sickness. Though, in patch 1.1, summoning sickness's duration scaled with your level beyond 10 minutes, and it did 100% damage to all of your gear. Sounds rough, doesn't it? Well, before that, instead, it removed a chunk of your experience. Most MMOs in this era did punish death in a decently hardcore manner, removing either experience or items. World of Warcraft actually broke this convention by only punishing you with a little walk. And for an example, Final Fantasy XI would remove chunks of XP on death, resulting in players having to re-level if they died too often. See,
for me, I'll be honest, like, that was something like, it's like if there are games that I lose experience for dying on, I just don't really play them a lot. I lose interest very quickly. Like that's to me, like, that's my cutoff. And what happens is I just stop having fun. Because, like, the way that I look at video games is I always want to be progressing towards something. And if I feel like I'm actually actively losing progression, I stop enjoying the game. Because now it's a stressful event that I have to think about and worry about and get upset about. So, yeah, I don't like games that punish you for dying in that way. Like, if I ever feel like I'm losing progress or losing time I've invested into a game, I very, very quickly lose interest in the game. It's the same reason why in Black Desert, for example, like, I just quit the game as soon as I figured out the way that they did jewelry and a few other things, right? I was like, this is just taking too long and I'm going to lose too much progress. And I don't have fun with it. Dark Souls is like that? Well, not really, because you can get your souls back. And it's also a single-player game, and there's nothing in Dark Souls that's as much of a time investment as, like, MMOs, right? It's basically, like, Dark Souls is a pretty casual game. I mean, you play Dark Souls, like, you can beat the game in, like, 20, 30 hours. If you die, you lose, like, maybe, 20 minutes of progress at the most. It's not a big deal. But, yeah. Diablo 2 has experienced loss and death. Well, no, I know that there are a lot of games that do have that, and to me, that's just a no-go for me. Like, I don't know, as I said, I just feel like it makes me feel like I'm wasting my time if I ever die. And if I ever feel like I'm wasting my time playing a game, I just quit the game.
Warcraft absolutely was a game designed for casual play at the time, as compared to its contemporaries, even though it did have high time requirements that make a lot of modern players maybe think that's a bit hard to believe. This for sure contributed to why World of Warcraft has been a household name for over a decade. It was pretty easy to get into and very easy to keep on playing. Then for general changes, this patch removed the spear weapon class, renaming it to polearms. They must have figured that using only spears was too limiting, and instead they wanted to use a more catch-all term that would include things like halberds and glaives.
They should just call them
The classes that could wield polearms in this patch were the hunters, paladins, and warriors, although, like with many classes, they had to find a trainer to teach them. Given that polearms had been underrepresented in the game and the animation set for them,
they're still underrepresented
for a spear or a polearm, this seems like an unimportant change, but it does let us know what Blizzard were thinking at the time. Of course, many lamented the inability to wield a one-handed spear along with a shield for a particular brand of warrior fantasy, and there were other basic casualties, such as rogues no longer having a buckler. Now, on the topic of gear, patch 1.1 also removed the ability to swap armor in combat. Now, before this, anything could be worn or taken off. Vanilla was full of really interesting and sometimes unintended weapon swapping behavior, like warriors swapping weapons along with stances and rogues initiating ambush with a dagger, but then changing for a slower weapon before the damage calculation happened. More generically, this enabled offhands and on-use effects to be swapped in, activated, and then
that's
swapped
really
out,
good.
like the Skull of Impending
Holy shit,
Doom.
I didn't even know
now,
about
this one was just wild, particularly in PvP. You see, it would do some self-damage, and that would potentially break a polymorph. Then you would get a 60% move speed buff for 10 seconds. Now, imagine you're a mage, you've polyed somebody, you've blinked away, and suddenly they're running at you at 60% move speed. If it wasn't removed, armor swapping, in addition to things like that, also would have given players the ability to just get naked right before they died in order to avoid durability damage.
The best fucking version of that was before they changed being able to not swap your gear in arena as soon as the match begins, is you would queue up and, like, let's say you had, like, shadow resistance gear or, like, frost resistance gear from, like, you know, fucking, like, tanking or, you know, Mother Shiraz. As soon as you'd see that you're playing against a warlock, you'd just equip all your shadow resist gear. And the warlock couldn't fucking do anything. And, like, eventually they changed it because people were getting so fucking mad they couldn't even play their class. It's hilarious.
It would have made your corpse finding travels a little bit more awkward. Now, this could have enabled some very interesting mechanics, but I think it's quite clear that armor swapping would have been far too much. Honestly, this might have even resulted in tanks carrying tank and DPS gear and swapping in between them in time with boss swings for their own ability usage, which
that's ridiculous.
Wild.
Classes.
1.1 also added Paladin and Hunter talents. Yep, these were unavailable until the last second. While I do...
That's because Blizzard originally planned for Paladins and Hunters not to have talents. to make the game more realistic.
Don't believe either of the classes were noticeably worse than others. This does show the kind of timescales for implementation that we're working with when it comes to vanilla. Blizzard were right up to the wire with so much of the game, really core fundamental parts of the game, and really at this stage some classes needed a lot more love than others. In fact, this patch significantly changed paladins across the board. They renamed the seals to Blessing and then added new seals, removing some of their auras like Healing Aura, but splitting Resistance Aura into separate spells rather than just being one combined. Now, Hunters didn't get major changes, but they did get access to their track spell, and Blizzard made a very
track mailboxes, by the way.
In a move that, well, saved the Hunter class fantasy quite a bit, renamed Outdoorsmanship to Survival and Ranged Combat to Marksmanship.
Outdoorsmanship?
Perhaps they were placeholder names, but
what
they
the
certainly
fuck?
were awkward.
Wow,
of course,
okay.
other classes had interesting changes too. Warlocks learned the Fell Hunter, Inferno, and the Curse and Ritual of Doom in this patch. Now, while the Ritual of Doom is not exactly the most reliable ability in the universe...
We should just call that from now on. Like, if we ever see a survival hunter, it's an outdoorsman hunter. Well, it actually kind of makes sense because they're outside of the raid because they don't get invited because they're fucking melee, you know? Nobody wants to have a melee character that can play range. So actually, you know what? It kind of did come full circle and it makes sense now.
It is extremely flavorful. Having a full party of 5 summon a Doom Guard, knowing that one of them will die, that's a pretty exciting event. And even worse, the Doom Guard was hostile and it needed to be enslaved.
Yep.
Now this meant that if the Ritual's dice rolled such that the Warlock died, well, the Doom Guard would just run rampant on the surviving 4 party members.
Hey, fuck 'em.
A very exciting experience, maybe not a beneficial one, but certainly a lot of flavor. Now, one of the most important class changes in this patch, and a controversial one that you have no doubt heard about, is the addition of priest racial abilities. Priests had 2 unique spells depending on what race they were, tying into the fact that each priest would have been following a different religion of sorts. So over on the Night Elf side, they had access to Star Shards, a weak version of Starfall that could channel on a target for damage, and then a Loon's Grace, a 20% dodge cooldown.
That's the Holy
Humans
Spirit.
had access to Desperate Prayer, a small self-heal, and Feedback, which was a cooldown that damaged and burnt the mana of
those are
magical
Protestants
attackers. The
and
Undead had
Puritans.
Touch of Weakness and Devouring Plague, whereas the Trolls had Hex of Weakness and Shadow Guard.
I can't make
Most
jokes
of these
about
spells
that.
were little bits of race-themed flavor,
Could
but
be
there's one that stands above the others, quite significantly.
The
Dwarves, in addition to having Desperate Prayer, had Fear Ward. Now, Fear Ward was a buff that protected against the fear effect. It lasted for 10 minutes, and it had a 30-second cooldown. And yeah, that one is just wild, especially given how powerful and common fears were in both PvE and PvP. This was just an insanely useful spell, and while the Alliance and the Horde had tons of contention over their faction differences, Fear Ward was one of the biggest talking points.
That's fucking broken, dude. Like, how does Horde manage without Fear Ward? Yeah, it's fucking insane. Like, every other class... Like, I thought Fear Ward was removed as soon as you cast a fear. It was like immunity from one fear. But no. You would just have it on for 10 minutes. Like, nobody can fucking fear me. I'm invincible to it now. That's insane, man. Of course, Horde are better? Yeah, right.
Priests had this perception of just being the best priests thanks to this one spell, even though the other priest races did have their own advantages. By the time that it became available to everyone years later, Fear Ward had been severely, severely nerfed. There was one more notable change here with classes and spells. Reagents were now required for a multitude of spells. This is another aspect of the role-playing game focus that the game had in this era. Slowfall for mages and Levitate for priests, well, they needed light feathers, and those dropped in various places around the world. I wish we had the stats on the number of players that were falling and just died immediately because they did not have the feathers for their Levitate.
So I actually learned this while I was jumping off of something, that you actually did need light feathers to use Levitate. I had no idea about this. It's a big surprise to me. But yeah, apparently you do need that. 1 second, I'm gonna read these real quick. You're a single reason why I have joy for WoW. It's completely amazing watching you and the joy it brings you, not to mention the knowledge that you have. Thanks for being such a great person. Smokey, thank you very much for the $15. I appreciate that, man. Again, another one. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate that. Keep up the excellent content, makes it like real quick. Can't wait to see your WoW Classic experience. I made a video too, maybe check it out offline sometimes. Tweet it at me and I might look at it, but I have to do it offline. I forgot to add the message first time, fuck my wife. If the chat hasn't watched your most ethical way to watch for Talent Vengeance rap video, they probably should. Also, Twitch Prime, boys. Thank you very much. very much. I appreciate the 5, Crumb Cratcher. At least whenever your boyfriend comes on your head, you don't have to wash your hair. What? When did I say that? Just like a random fucking message. Thanks for the $5, man. Appreciate that, I guess. Thanks.
I'm not sure what the numbers are, but I'm pretty sure they're high. Okay. Shamans needed reagents for water walking and water breathing. Even more significant than that, though, is Druid's Rebirth. This spell, a combat rest, was like extremely useful in group content, but it required a seed, and the type of seed changed depending on the rank of the spell. Acquiring these was just as simple as buying it from a vendor, but sometimes Druids would...
You guys remember that girl, Corazil, or Cora, that I streamed with like 3 years ago? So this is a really, really, really long time ago. She was the blonde girl that I streamed with. Like, you go back and look at my VODs, right? And so anyway, she, yeah, most of you guys don't remember. I probably have more viewers now than I had followers back then. So yeah, there were a lot of people, right? And so the first time I ever played with her, I asked her to battle res me in a fight, and we were doing like Stonecore or something. And she said she didn't have the seeds for it. I kicked her out of the fucking group. I was like, you're not going to come into this raid. You're not going to have your fucking eye. I kicked her out of the fucking group. I got her out of there. The seeds, yeah, they have a... I remember these very, very well.
Would run out, and if you valued your raid spot or the friendship of your dungeon group, well, you would make sure you were not one of those druids who ran out. So there you go, that is basically everything of real note that changed in patch 1.1. It's a patch that still would have been a bit rough for sure, but it would have been magical, with Blizzard somehow pulling everything together into a cohesive experience, even when just a few beta patches ago, the game had systems that likely would have limited its growth. They really did pull some magic out of the hat for this one. It really is incredible how much World of Warcraft changed in its final period of beta development, but we're soon going to see how much World of Warcraft changed as a live game, because patch 1.1 by no means was a complete version of vanilla World of Warcraft. Classes were spotty, loot had its problems, features like Battlegrounds did not even exist yet. We're going to see a lot of change, continuing with next week's episode, patch 1.2. So, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more, and if you would like to directly support the work
I didn't even know all this shit happened in patch 1.1.
Consider subscribing to our Patreon, where we've got monthly art packs, and this one's is Paladin. Plus, we also have 2 bonus items that I think you'll like quite a bit indeed.
Next week we'll be playing Classic,
you're right. And I'll see you next time.
Holy shit. New 8-minute Classic video, we watched that before, okay? We already did look at that, okay? Now that we're finished, PTR, I don't know about Transmog Comp right now, dude. I want to look at the Nixium video. Let's take a look at that, all right? Apparently it just came out.